I've been replaying through the entire mainline Hitman series, and it's a franchise of games that have come a long way, as well as a franchise that I've grown up with. My first Hitman game being Hitman 2 Silent Assassin, like many other fans of the franchise. From the humble and humbling beginnings of Codename 47 to the fully realized and absolute powerhouse of games that is the World of Assassination trilogy. It's a series that's been trying to master its craft for many years, and has only now truly realized its vision and mastered the craft. But other than the World of Assassination trilogy, there are two older Hitman games that stick with me that I keep coming back to: Hitman Silent Assassin and Hitman Contracts. Silent Assassin is when the series pretty much found itself as an assassin simulator where ghostly assassinations were encouraged and combat was discouraged but still welcome. Codename 47 was merely a proof of concept or rough draft, a rough skeleton for something more ambitious to come. Silent Assassin was IO Interactive adding appropriate flesh to that rough skeleton, and despite the game's flaws in terms of AI and some design inconsistencies, Silent Assassin is still a competent game in today's world. But Contracts was when IO Interactive took the time to refine the flesh of Silent Assassin before coming out with the most iconic game in the franchise, Blood Money. Contracts improved the game design and the AI of Silent Assassin significantly, making it a much better game to play than Silent Assassin. With that being said though, Silent Assassin and Contracts have something low-key special about them. Something genuinely artistic and tasteful. Silent Assassin with its story and themes, and Contracts with its memorable atmosphere and surreal concepts. This video is similar to my recent Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry and Mirror's Edge video, in that we'll be revisiting and remastering previous videos that I feel like need a bit of an overhaul. In this case, overhauling my two Hitman videos and combining them into one. But if you want to see a much more in-depth take on these two games, feel free to still check out those videos, albeit with a different presentation and style. Enjoy. Hitman 2 Silent Assassin tells a story of 47 trying to find his place in the world. It's a story of an attempted inner peace intercepted by a conflict that would ultimately cause a revelation of self-acceptance. Silent Assassin still remains my favorite story of the earlier Hitman games in terms of the premise, themes, and some of the writing. While later games would give 47 more depth, Silent Assassin gave 47 more humanity. We get an insight on 47's views on life. We also see 47 actually having someone he truly cares for, Father Vittorio, the priest of a Sicilian church. The story starts with two mysterious men intrigued by the legend of 47, who's been under the radar for quite some time after the events of Codename 47, where Agent 47 had to kill Dr. Ortmeyer, his creator, and leave the asylum. These men aim to get 47 out of hiding and to meet the Silent Assassin himself. We then see a retired 47 gardening at a Sicilian church, and we meet Father Vittorio, who has a heart-to-heart with 47 about his past and regrets, where Vittorio urges him to confess at the church. After the confession, Father Vittorio is captured by thugs and held for ransom, with a requirement of $500,000 for his release. 47 has donated all of his wealthy profits to the church, so he no longer has this money and will have to rejoin the ICA for assistance. So he does just that. The Silent Assassin gets back into the game on the search for his only friend, but there's a catch. Agent 47 also has to assist the ICA with a shadow client plot, alongside trying to find Vittorio. 47 accepts, and the story is set up. 47 does some globe-trotting and kills some targets to find Vittorio, but also help the ICA with their plot. It turns out that all the targets 47 has been killing are all connected to the shadow clients of the ICA as some part of conspiracy. Later, it's revealed that the client ordering all these hits is the mysterious Russian man from the intro, the man who wanted to get 47 out of retirement, and our antagonist of the story, Sergei Savarotko. He's the one holding Vittorio hostage and tells 47 to meet him at the Sicilian church for a final showdown. The church is crawling with Sergei's men, and 47 has to kill him in order to save Vittorio, which he ultimately does. After Vittorio has seen the horrific and bloody acts that 47 is capable of, 47 tells Vittorio that he is of better use somewhere else, as 47 accepts his purpose. Vittorio tells 47 to be careful in his future escapades and hands him a crucifix. As 47 leaves, he has this monologue.
Always knew I never belonged in this world. I wasn't made for this. But I'll never forget those who betrayed me, and those who never failed my trust. I'll be carrying nothing from Contrano but this lesson. Never trust anyone, and rely on your instincts. Forget the past. I'll never find peace here. So, I'll seek justice for myself. I'll choose the truth I like.
Now admittedly, Silent Assassin is kind of story deprived for most of the campaign, and the plotline of saving Vittorio is kind of left on the wayside after the first few missions. The story merely has a setup, midpoint, and a finale, with not much going on in between. So the story here is more to set up a reason or provide context to the gameplay than a typical story. This was during the time when the series' narrative direction and priorities was to only contextualize gameplay before Hitman Blood Money changed to a more fully fledged narrative direction. But even then, the context being laid down here is still very interesting and touching. Silent Assassin is almost essential to fully understanding the human within 47, and is still a worthy tale with some relatable themes. It's an unfortunate tale, in that no matter how hard 47 tries to change, he'll always be pulled back into his old ways and never seems to truly catch a break, because he literally has no effective control over his life. He was born a killing machine, therefore he will always remain a killing machine. It kind of reminds me of the movie Trainspotting, where Mark Renton, the protagonist, is a junkie trying to go clean, but is constantly being pulled back into his old ways. But unlike 47, who accepts that he is what he is, Renton denies what he is and aims to change for the better. They're both relatable and unfortunate stories that I enjoy almost thoroughly. But I do really wish that the story focused a lot more on the plotline of saving Vittorio, because while the conspiracy plotline is cool and all, we've already had that almost exact same story in the previous game, Codename 47. I also feel like we should have gotten more of 47's monologues. On certain missions, 47 gives us an insight on his views of certain locations, which adds some nice bits of characterization to this mostly mute character. But after some of the earlier missions, these monologues are rare and you're kind of just dropped into the mission. But for the bit of dialogue and cinematics that does focus on 47's humanization and the main themes of the story, it still does enough to be notable and an essential part of Silent Assassin. Morten Iversen and Peter von Linstow, the scriptwriter and story writer for the game, managed to create a spy story with some heart, taking a retired and soulless killing machine who wants a normal life of finding his soul, but then pulling him back into the fray for the sake of saving his friend, resulting in him realizing that he can't change because he was destined to be a soulless killing machine. For a game that uses its narrative for the mere sake of giving the gameplay a purpose instead of telling a proper story, Silent Assassin tried something unique to set up gameplay context, and it'll forever remain one of my favorite stories in the Hitman series because of the themes that the game tried to tackle. Sure, it's not the most fleshed out aspect of the story, but there was an attempt with a great setup and an even better conclusion.
In the powder itself. Pulling back the slide with a handgun will tighten the recoil spring and draw back or cock the hammer. Once released, the slide moves forward, lifting a new cartridge into the chamber. The gun is now loaded. Pulling the trigger now releases the hammer, which drives the firing pin forward until it strikes and ignites the propellant in the cartridge. This results in a rapid expansion of gas within the chamber, which forces the bullet forward and ejects its casing. This energy also produces a brief muzzle flash and a sharp report.
He knew me, actually recognized me, and looked me in my eyes. And he expected me. As if... Oh, that's impossible.
This is where things take a very dark and surreal turn. The immediate difference in tone and atmosphere is on full display the moment you open the game. Silent Assassin was vibrant, freeing, and epic, while Contracts is grim, claustrophobic, and isolated, which fits both stories very well. Hitman Contract's story, or the near lack thereof, is weird to say the least. Weird in that it's even more story deprived than Silent Assassin, which is even more of a shame because the premise of Contracts is a really unique and compelling one that can make for a hell of a psychological thriller, especially in the Hitman universe. Contracts is a side story of sorts, as it takes place after a certain mission in Hitman Blood Money, which would come out a few years after Contracts. Contracts feels like one of those stories that show off the off-screen moments of a bigger story, where events that happen off-screen are mentioned but brushed over. Because in Blood Money it's mentioned that 47 had a bit of an off period after some run-in with a cop. Contracts is all about that off period. But it's because of this off period that I feel like Contract's story was a hugely missed opportunity. But it also comes to show that the story approach to Hitman games at the time was to only provide context to the gameplay and nothing more. But even Contracts starts to abandon context halfway through the game. Let's talk about it. Contracts has one of the best openings in the series and really has you invested from the get-go. It has you asking so many questions because even if it seems simple on the surface, there's quite a bit going on here. It opens with a strange television program that explains the inner workings of a gun, which then transitions into a loud gunshot and horrific audible chaos, introducing us to a wounded 47. 47 takes one step into his hotel room and falls unconscious, which then marks the beginning of his surreal journey. The reason why this opening is so great is because it sets up the surreal and eerie nature of the story in a clever way. This opening brings up two questions as well. How does someone of 47's skills and professionalism get into a situation like this? And what happened? Now unfortunately the rest of the game is deprived of story and is very disjointed. But it all just adds up to 47 having fever dreams of past Contracts, while he slowly bleeds out. An ICA doctor arrives at 47's place to patch him up, but soon leaves him to fend for himself as the GIJN arrives and plan a raid on his hotel room, which ends in 47 killing the man who shot him, Inspector Albert Fournier. Afterwards, he heads on an airplane where Diana sets him up for his next mission, which continues in Blood Money. Contract's lack of story is a bit disappointing, but the little bit of storytelling that is present might unintentionally be symbolic of one of the game's main themes or narrative concepts: fever dreams. Fever dreams are vivid, bizarre, and unpleasant dreams that one experiences when having a fever. It's the brain reacting to the fever when the head has inconsistent or intense temperatures. Some fever dreams contain spatial distortion, threats and dangers, as well as causing illness. Spatial distortion makes sense when it comes to the remade levels in Contracts. Contracts has levels from Codename 47 remade, reimagined, and overhauled for this game. Some of these remade levels are, or seem, bigger than their original versions, adding to the spatial distortion when environments change sizes. Threats and dangers may seem obvious, but the way Contracts handles threats and dangers is a lot more intense, which is thanks to the sound design and overall atmosphere. The sound of Contracts is eerie, intense, and abrasive. The atmosphere is dreamy and hostile. Being detected in Contracts feels a lot more haunting than being detected in Silent Assassin or even the World of Assassination trilogy. That's all because of the atmosphere that's being set up here. The way the music changes when 47 is detected or has a close call, paired with the actions of the hostiles around you, be it gunfire or watching you carefully, is anxiety-inducing. Suspense in Contracts is borderline scary, and the first shots of gunfire will sometimes have you jumping out of your seat. And the most important or relevant aspect of Fever Dreams in this case is that they don't make sense nor have any real connections. In other words, disjointed. Which makes sense when referring to the disjointed nature of the storytelling. So I don't know whether I should applaud the story for following a Fever Dream structure or knock it for not telling a proper story. Most of Contract's story is found during these surreal cinematics in between certain missions, where 47 envisions these trippy scenarios that reflect on his past and visualizes the heart of darkness that 47 possesses. Dialogue is scarce, but when there is dialogue, it's fairly well written and even better acted by David Bateson as 47. There's also a subplot in the latter half of the game that has 47 in Hong Kong partaking in a triad plot, where 47 must spark a triad war between the Red Dragon and Blue Lotus triads in order to create a window to kill a triad leader named Li Hong. This is easily the most consistent plotline in the overall story. But the plot isn't where Contract's narrative shines, it's the atmosphere. Contracts is easily the most grim and edgy game in the series. It's eerie, dark, grimy, adult, psychological, and surreal. The atmosphere best represents the story being told here because it acknowledges 47's state of being, his environment, and his psychological character. 47 is bleeding out during the rainy and cold nighttime, which is also depicted in his Fever Dreams, where every map takes place at night and is either rainy or snowy, the snow representing 47's possible cold sweats or cold room. The soundtrack, atmosphere, and visuals together make for a gameplay and story experience that can only be summed up as hazy and grim. As an overall game, I prefer Contracts, but in terms of story, I prefer Silent Assassin. But these two games are really important as they define the tone and identity of the Hitman series going forward. This franchise is an epic spy thriller, with occasionally dark and sometimes psychological elements. But these two games also highlight a special time in the Hitman series. They are two games on two sides of an evolutionary line in the series' history. Silent Assassin represents the unpolished, quantity over quality era of Hitman games, whereas Contracts represents the mostly polished, quality over quantity era. There was a notable change in attitude during the development of Contracts, because Contracts is the first Hitman game that I feel is more than 90% polished as an overall product. The gameplay and the design finally work as intended and contain a whole heap of quality of life improvements that make the gameplay and overall presentation near perfect. Each level is well designed and polished to a T with little to no drops in quality throughout the entire 12 mission campaign, which was one of my biggest problems with Silent Assassin as a whole. Silent Assassin is unfortunately too ambitious for its own good. Having 22 missions may seem great on the surface, but it doesn't help that more than a half of those 22 levels are unpolished or just lacking in quality. Play the first few missions of Silent Assassin and compare them to the latter half of the game, and you'll see what I mean. The game tries to have a lot of content but doesn't try to polish much of it. Now, I'm not hating on Silent Assassin by any means. Even though I'm not too fond of the latter half of the game, I still enjoyed some of the missions in that latter half, even if some of the jank does become more prominent in those missions. But Contracts feels polished and focused right out the gate, and it keeps that consistency for much of its runtime. I wouldn't even say that there's a mission I disliked in Contracts. Every mission feels so consistent and compelling through and through. Now yes, some missions might be shorter than others, but they still feel well realized and well thought out. Which is why, alongside the World of Assassination trilogy, Contracts is one of my top favorite Hitman games. It's a standalone expansion of sorts to Silent Assassin, because it takes Silent Assassin's promising but flawed formula and backbone and polishes it into the game that Silent Assassin tried it to be. IO Interactive learned from their mistakes, and even though they had to rush the development of Contracts, it still ended up being one of the better games in the series. Silent Assassin and Contract, in my opinion, have aged fairly well. Silent Assassin less so, but these are still competent games with lots to offer. Silent Assassin's story and especially its theme struck a chord with me, and I ended up relating to it a lot. I played through it during a tough time in my life where I kind of didn't know who I was or where to go in life. I needed to find myself, just like 47 throughout the game. 47's monologue at the end of Silent Assassin, if you remove the assassin jargon, hits a different way when you're at that point in your life where you need to discover yourself. After recovering from that point in my life, I immediately started Contracts. A dark and less meaningful transition, sure, but I still learned and got a lot out of Contracts through its surrealism and eerie atmosphere. Contracts was experimental and kind of ahead of the curve in some ways, and there's something beautiful about Contracts' edginess and eeriness. If you haven't played these two games and you like the later Hitman games, or just like stealth games in general, I heavily recommend playing these games. You can get them dirt cheap these days on Steam or on PS3 and Xbox 360. The Hitman series has always been about trial and error as well as patience, but these games require a bit more trial, error and patience. But once you get the hang of it, they feel absolutely rewarding. I never knew I'd say this, but the Hitman series feels like a very important part of my life in a way. I've learned a lot about life and art through these games, what it takes to make art, trial and error, pros and cons of ambition, taking time to master and polish your craft, stuff like that. Conan 47, while still a good enough game, prioritized its technical ambitions instead of its gameplay. Silent Assassin was a realization and a step in the right direction, but was still flawed in certain areas. Contracts nailed the old formula, and Blood Money mastered the craft. Absolution took one step forward, two steps back, and the World of Assassination trilogy took the mastered formula of Blood Money and started expanding it in great ways. Now that is a story to learn from. Sup folks, thanks for watching this video. I know I should have came out with the Assassin's Creed movie video by now, but I remembered that I had this video script almost ready for like a month or so now, and decided just to put out a smaller video in between. Smaller, I say. But I'm still finishing up that Assassin's Creed video script, and I didn't want to keep you waiting for another 2 months for a video. Besides, I'm basically on holiday now since I'm done with the school term or semester, so I can pop out a few videos in the coming weeks. Lastly, I want to ask what you guys want out of the channel. So in the video game movie adaptations video, there was a deleted recording of the postscript for that video, so I had to write it in the comments, but let me just do a voiceover of that postscript now. So I've been thinking about my upload frequency and different types of videos, right? So since my content creation philosophy is quality over quantity, I came up with a few ideas. Should I come up with smaller standalone videos and episodic videos to kind of upload in between? Smaller standalone videos are pretty self-explanatory, you know, they're just shorter video essays on slightly niche topics that I upload between the release of those bigger 20-minute videos. And then the episodic videos basically being the 20-minute videos, but like split up into smaller parts just to fill in the release gap and keep you in the loop of videos that I'm working on. So like usually videos that would take probably more than 30 minutes, like because my limit of a video length is 30 minutes, so if it reaches over 30 minutes I'll like break up the video into 2 or 3 parts, and in those parts, those smaller parts, I'll try to make them as fleshed out as possible. basically try to drain those parts dry by the end of the video. And then for the smaller standalone videos, I basically mean small as in under 15 minutes or so. But we'll see how that goes. So just remember, the next video is the Assassin's Creed movie video, which is a character study video, something I haven't done in a while. But in the meantime, everyone stay safe, stay entertained, take care, and take it easy. Cheers.